Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the Gospels, looking at the 250 events of the life of Jesus. And today we are looking at Jesus' brothers ridiculing him or mocking him. And this is going to come from John 7 1 through 9. If you hadn't been following along, what we're doing is we're going through the four Gospels chronologically and looking at them as they kind of played out. And it kind of plays out a little bit differently whenever you look at all four of them together as they happen. It kind of helps you see how one message piles or works with the other. And so if you haven't had a chance to yet, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We're going to continue to push these out and produce, this series that we're doing here. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into kind of everyday questions and everyday issues that we see and struggle with in life. So, if you would like to see more of that, then obviously go ahead and subscribe to our channel. And so today we're looking at Jesus's brother Ridicule. And this comes from John 7. And actually, the next couple days we're going to be in kind of going back and forth. Like we hit John, and then we're going to hit a few, and then we're going to go deeper into John a little bit. And it's kind of interesting. I like Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They really kind of parallel each other quite a bit in a lot of their messaging. And then John kind of stands out a little bit on its own. And so we kind of see a lot of things in John that we might not get in some of the other gospels. So I really like John. So John 7 verses 1 through 9 here, right? It says, after this, and Jesus had traveled around Galilee. He wanted to stay out of Judea where the Jewish leaders were because they were plotting his death, right? And his time hadn't come, so he was being cautious of how he do this. But soon it was time for the Jewish festival of shelters, and we're going to look at what that is. And it was something that a Jewish guy, boy, man was required to go to or was supposed to go to. And so Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea where your followers can see your miracles. You can't become famous if you hide like this. If you can do such wonderful things, show it yourself to the world." For even his brothers didn't believe in him. So they weren't being serious here. They were mocking him. They were, poking fun at him a little bit. And so Jesus replied, "Now is not the right time for me to go, but you can go anytime." So he's letting them know, "I'm not going right now. You can go. The world can't hate you, but it does hate me because I accuse it of doing evil. You go on. I'm not going to the festival because my time has not yet come." After saying these things, Jesus remained in Galilee. And so we're going to see in verse 10, so we're not going to kind of get that until today, that he ends up going. So we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. So it's like, well, Jesus said he wasn't going, and then he goes. What's up with that? So we're going to look at that a little bit here. But to go back real quick and look at this, the Festival of Shelters, it's described, if you want to go and look at it, it's described in Leviticus 23, around verse 33 or so. And this event occurred in October. It was about the 6 months after the Passover celebration that's mentioned in John 6 2 through 5. And so Jesus' brothers, right, reminded him of his religious obligation to celebrate the festival. There was a religious obligation to go and celebrate this festival. Their words were cynical, right? They weren't being legitimate. They weren't being real, like, honest or sincere when they were doing this. And so when you look at this is they were kind of mocking him. And so we see that because they didn't believe in him yet. And so we don't see that a lot of his brothers don't believe in it until after the resurrection. And so one of the things we see here, right, Jesus' statement says, "I'm not going up to the feast." It shouldn't be taken as a mistake, because we see in John in verse 10 here in a minute that he does, even though he goes up to the feast. And so if you actually look at the Greek tense here, because a lot of people say, well, Jesus lied or he contradicted himself here. So no, I think it's the way it's translated. And so if you look at this, the Greek present tense can mean "I'm not going now," like I'm not going right now, indicating that Jesus did not go up to the festival in the way his brother suggested. Basically, he was saying, "I'm not going the way that you're talking about, right? Or I'm not going right now. You guys go ahead and go." But but he wasn't saying, "I'm not going at all." He was just saying, "I'm not going the way that you're suggesting or bringing up." And so we need to be careful here. And so, in fact, many of the oldest and best manuscripts say, "Not yet. I'm not going yet." Right. And so, and that's a, it's a key difference, right? So if you say, "I'm not going to go there," or "I'm not going to go there yet," right, that one word makes a big difference. And so that's what most scholars believe that Jesus is saying. If you look at the Greek, the way it's kind of played out was, "I'm not going yet," or "I'm not going to go the way you want me to. I'm going to go on my own." And so the thing we see here is that Jesus' brothers have a difficult time believing in him. right? And you got to get that, right? I mean, they grew up with him. They saw who he like was a kid and so that stuff. Now he was doing miracles, but for whatever reason they mocked his miracles. But in the end, which is interesting, some of his brothers that we know of, like that's written, and some of these brothers, right, like James, for example, end up being leaders in the church. But for several years, they were embarrassed by Jesus. They didn't believe in him. They didn't believe who he claimed to be. But after his death and resurrection, they believed who he was. And so, to me, right, this even gives us more evidence and more proof that Jesus was who he was and who he said he was. Because seriously, I mean, you think about it, right? If your brother claimed to be the Messiah, the Son of God, and you didn't believe him before his death and resurrection, so it's written about him. It's written about like James. We can use James as an example, right? And he said he was one of the brothers who mocked him, and he didn't believe in him. But then you didn't believe in him, but then he dies, and then a lot of scholars or a lot of people, I'm sorry, not really scholars, but a lot of people and people who don't believe in Jesus say, oh well, they just made it up and continued with his lie to keep the thing going. These guys were persecuted. These guys were tortured, were abused, were beaten, were put to death for believing and teaching that Jesus raised from the dead. Right? They didn't. It wasn't for believing that Jesus was a great guy and that he was awesome and a wonderful teacher. Right? They were killed because they taught that Jesus was God and raised from the dead. Now, if they were making this up, how many people do you think beforehand didn't believe? But yet they saw Jesus dead and he didn't resurrect, but yet then now his brothers are going to believe and continue on with this story and write a book, right? James writes a book. And so, or I'm sorry, a letter, right, to this. So again, this shows me that something changed James' mind. Something changed his mind to the point that where he was willing to sacrifice himself for the cause, for the mission of Jesus Christ. And so you have all these people who are willing to do that. They don't do that for something that's made up. People don't die, right? Groups of people do not put themselves to as martyrs and die and be tortured for something that they think really didn't happen, but they're going to make it up to keep it going. And so I think this even like shows more of the evidence that Jesus was who he was. I actually like the fact, I mean, it's I would say maybe like something. I like seeing though that it's pointed out that Jesus' own brothers didn't believe in him, but then later on, several of them do, and several of them, like one of them, we see some of them become leaders in the church. So obviously, something happened that changed their mind. That would have been the resurrection of Christ, and so we see that they finally believed after that. And so the thing we have to remember here, and this is because the world hated Jesus, right? The world did not like Jesus. The world hated Jesus. The religious people of the time hated Jesus, or the religious leaders of the time hated Jesus. So that's something to think about. We those who follow him, those who follow Jesus and his teachings, you can expect that many people will hate us. And if you stay true to a lot of Jesus' teachings and what was wrote about him and what he taught, sometimes the religious leaders are going to not like you. I mean, that's part of it, and so we see that, and I say religious leaders because sometimes we have religion over here and we have Christianity, and there is a difference. And so those who are religious, right, and look more like the Pharisees do, they're not going to like a lot of times the teachings of Jesus that we see of love and compassion. And and I think we see that we're starting to see that divide more and more in the church, where the church has become more about the things you do or the people you support or the politics you have or that stuff. It's become more about that than it has become being like Jesus and treating people like Jesus said to do. And so we need to make sure that we're focused on Jesus, right? Him, having a relationship with him, and not making sure that we uphold all the things that our current religious system says, right? Because there's a big difference. There's a big difference in a lot of religions, right? Even religions that claim Christianity, than there is being a Christian and following Christ. We need to understand those differences and look at that. And so, again, even if we go back to this, right? We go back to this whole message. Even Jesus's brothers made fun of him. They rocked him, they ridiculed him, but in the end, they saw who he really was and they followed him. And that should be a lesson to us that, hey, this guy really is who he said he was, and we need to make sure that we follow him. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching the videos, following along with our YouTube channel, and being participating in our groups and stuff like that. I really do appreciate it. If you haven't yet, right, signed up in our groups, there's a link in the YouTube description, and you can always get in there. We have conversations in the chat that we dive deeper into things that people have questions of. If you want to just comment on the YouTube channel, ask questions there, we can do it there as well. It's no big deal. We enjoy having legitimate conversation, even if you disagree. Like, it's fun. It's good to have those conversations and see the different aspects and see the different point of views of everyone that we come in contact with. As always, I appreciate everyone for sticking around and watching the videos. Thank you.